Chapter 6. Stochastic Routines. Blue had issued a letter of concern to the upper floors, indicating that my expected disposition spectrum had consistently entered into 3 standard deviations recently. An alpha residing on the upper floors received the encrypted message. After reading it, but elected to disregard the report, the data was considered white noise, a symptom of my recent exceptional performance and associated stress. He typed a quick reply message on his computer. Bayes' overall stealth, E-graph's confidence interval, is deemed acceptable, even though exhibiting temporary transgressions into the 3 standard deviation range. The message was shared to a centralized database cluster warehouse situated in a grubby industrial estate on the city's border, to be processed by the confidence interval server clusters, known as the augmenter. The alpha kept note of his computer while waiting for final confirmation from the information infrastructure, the augmenter, for the alpha's discretionary veto request to be approved. While waiting, the alpha thought that my performance had been extraordinary. I had produced 3 standard deviations of positive work by catching pareidolia. He reasoned, conveniently, even hypocritically, that I had now entered into a negative 3 standard deviation range, which was an acceptable balance in this specific case. This balance regressed me back to normality, to my personal expected mean. It was a form of self-augmenting my own behavior and emotions, subconsciously, or maybe it was by the very laws of the statistics and the universal laws itself, a natural regression of things, an ergodic regression back to the average, an individual version of the wisdom of crowds scenario. The alpha immediately scrubbed the thought of wisdom of crowds. He looked around for a moment, realizing that even he was subject to statistical monitoring. The alpha knew that the utopian state encouraged the nodes to bob along their expected cast, mean, predictably, reliably, their daily actions tainted slightly by a subtle, unpredictable, random white noise, yet acceptable as minor momentary deviations from the expected mean. But in certain cases there could be exceptions, he concluded. Just then, the augmenter returned a message. The simple message masked the complicated algorithm codes of countless calculations, auto-correlations of related nodes, causations, and interrelations, to finally produce a short answer. Stealth E-graph, Bayes 3, 1, 4, 2, 8, beta ministry, monthly, standard deviation, significant, null, invitation, Arcadian, null. The alpha allowed a slight smirk to flash across his face. Soon Bayes would be one of us, he concluded. This alpha had saved me from an unnecessary doom. Those slip-ups were only for the countless nodes, the statistically insignificant, that inhabited the population regression function crowd. The alpha only took note of the endogenous nodes' general activity, as they scurried to and fro, intermittently, at set times each day, to lunch, or back and forth from work. Blue's report had confirmed to the alpha, not of my statistical transgression, but of what the alpha already knew, that of Blue's borderline sociopathic personality. It made perfect sense to expect Blue to be jealous of me in general. Now, with my success, it was all predictable, all reasonable. No, the alpha was satisfied with the current events, even with my current abnormal routines. The alpha also approved of Blue's report. Blue's jealous character trait was to be encouraged, to have the lower caste, especially the caste privy to the state's secrets, such as the beta nodes at the Ministry of Inferences betraying each other. It was good for the alpha. It kept them divided, and us in control, he concluded. I received a message in my embedded device. I was scheduled to attend a meeting with the alphas on the upper floors. I felt anxious. What was it for? Did they already know about my meeting with the errors, or was it because of my rebellious feelings regarding Mrs. White's demise? Or was it the incident with Blue? But these events were all too sudden for them to know. After making my way to upper floor, I sat in the impressive lobby of the upper floors, superficially noting the receptionists working away behind the large, glamorous reception desk. Intermittently, an alpha floated past, quickly yet confidently, too busy with important work to look up. I had met the odd alpha once or twice for a fleeting moment during my career, but mainly never saw them, only vicariously on monitors. Once, an alpha had shaken my hand when joining the ministry, but nothing more than that. The alpha never interacted with the ministry workers. They were too busy, too aloof. I had heard that the upper floors were luxurious. Now, I was sitting there, on a large leather couch, engulfed by a shiny marble floor. All the while, the beta receptionists typed away. I was filled with anxiety, which was heightened in some perverted way by the incessant background music of continual advertisements that ran out, "Jingo Jazz washes clothes brighter." I was feeling nauseous with anxiety, coupled with the sickening antithesis of the overly cheerful music. The music seemed completely indifferent to my plight. I tried to stay focused, thinking positive emotions. I had been secretly classified an aware outlier. Was this how they got rid of aware outliers in my position? Would I be overpowered when entering the Alpha's office, whisked away to some covert concentration camp? I do not know. I let out a conscious thought, masking it behind an expected crescendo of the loud musical finale, ending of the Jingo Jazz advertisement. The scanners would not pick up unexpected emotional activity when there was loud music accompanying an advertisement. It would be regarded as white noise, as it was directly related to a temporary sensory overload induced by the music. I was aware of these facts, as I had personally factored out similar emotional data from Countess Node's monthly statistical analysis to determine if they fell outside the confidence interval. I slipped in. One last masked thought before the music would stop. I must just sit, focused, feel happy. I focused on feeling happiness. The scanner's invisible, all-pervasive electromagnetic waves continually scanned the ether, monitoring the nodes' brains, including mine, determining if their emotions and implied thoughts were statically insignificant. If they were within the expected emotional confidence interval, the atmosphere of the Avertsman determined the situation to be fitted to the model. The scanner's contemporaneous analysis registered me as happy. It was the expected autocorrelation of emotions, the situation, and the contemporaneous advertisement mood placement. I exhibited a perfect autocorrelation score of 2. Durbin Watts would be proud. The scanners, however, could not read intentions or motivations for my happiness. I drew on a deferred happy emotion, not from my recent success, but from avoiding Blue's meddling. I sat there smiling, my anxiety lifted, content in my resignation to whatever fate arose. "A Kinian will see you now," said an attractive receptionist, peering through a pair of glasses, which privately recorded everything she saw and did. I smiled back at her, knowing that I too would be recorded by her glasses. I entered the doorway to the Alpha's office, as it made a swishing noise, was opening, automatically. Around the table sat 3 Alpha nodes, without moving or showing emotion. "Take a seat," said one of them, without making eye contact. They all stared ahead, into the void, without showing the courtesy of looking at me. They were too aloof to look at a beta node, their civil servant, a glorified sigma node. They were dressed impeccably, not a hair out of place. The first Alpha began the conversation without introduction, just speaking in a formal, monotonous tone. "Mr. Bayes, you have done a great service for the ministry by apprehending the outlier, pareidolia. A thorn in our side," said the second Alpha, "an intolerable, viral, inefficient catalyst of the state," said the third Alpha. "We therefore commend you for your service," said the first Alpha. "Thank you," they all resounded simultaneously. Then all chose to look up, making eye contact for a split second, and nodding their heads in recognition. It was a moment of equality, of acceptance by the Alpha, for a split second. They almost seemed like regular nodes. "It also has come to our attention that you were recently in an altercation in a public park," said the first Alpha ominously. I felt a sudden rush of anxiety. Had they found out about the errors, the medicine? "We wish you a speedy recovery," said the second Alpha. "We also would like to inform you that you have been placed on a pre-promotional observation period of 3 months. After this, if you are seen as fit, you will be awarded the title of Alpha," said the third Alpha. "Do you have any objections?" asked the first Alpha. A genuine smile broadened on my face. I had been conditioned my entire life to covet promotions. Not just any promotion, from Delta to Gamma. No, rather a beta node to an Alpha at the Ministry of Inferences, no less. There was no need trying to muster an expected pseudo-emotion. I was genuinely proud and simultaneously relived. I was not going to be eliminated in a secret concentration camp, but rather promoted into a position of near infallibility. "No objection, sir," I said, relieved. The Alpha made eye contact again to witness the realization on my face, that soon I too would be on their level, free of the sigma classification stigma. Soon I would be elevated, like them. It must be their little joke. No node could ever object to an Alpha or to the system. Who would object to a promotion into the Alpha's world, to escape the drudgery of the Sigma's normality, the burden of their working caste? "Good then. I am sure we will see you on the upper floors in the near future," concluded the second Alpha. "What name have you chosen?" inquired the third Alpha. Without hesitating, I blurted out eagerly, "Augur." They all smiled at each other. "That is a good name for you indeed," said the first, appreciating the relevance of the name relative to my role. "Yes," said the second, "a well-thought-out name for a statistical node." "I mean citizen," said the third Alpha, correcting himself, trying to hide his hidden bias towards the lower caste nodes, the non-Alpha, exogenous, contributing nodes. The first Alpha wanted to distance himself from the embarrassment of the slip. By bringing to a close the meeting, he concluded, "Well, Mr. Bayes, please, do not let us keep you any longer from your important work. Helping to protect our utopian state, said the second Alpha. We all owe you a debt of gratitude, said the third Alpha. It was all patronizing pseudo-praise. I knew it. They knew it. It did not matter. I was safe. Soon to be promoted, I thought, while still exhibiting a genuine happy emotion. They all stood up immediately and simultaneously presenting their hands to shake my mine. They then sat down, with the same rigid regiment as they had stood up with, immediately returning to their seats, staring off into the void, as if I was no longer there. I turned around for the door, eager to leave the embarrassing void, as the door swished close behind. I was glad to leave them. That moment of embarrassing void had shown more about their empty character and inhumanity than all the words they had carefully chosen. The elevator made it back to the middle floor. I no longer knew how to feel inside, but elected to support an enigmatic smirk etched on upon face, to appease the scanners and create a lagged, expected prior emotion, which the soon-to-be-informed Ministry Beta Sigma would take note of. I made my way to my desk, taking a moment to reflect on the day and week's events, whilst conscious of the emotional thought scanners. I sat there calmly creating a busy, attentive facade, while endless data streamed past my screen, soaking my eyes in a luminous ether of information, soaking into my brain, data and words transformed automatically into ideas and thoughts, in my conscious. The process. A result conditioned by years of education. Lines, curves, graphs, nodes, information, data, relations, causations, autocorrelations, degrees of freedom, sample sets, estimates, p-values, stochastic errors, downloaded, uploaded, analyzed, dissected, logs and lags added, weighted, augmented, then repackaged to different departments, to be added to the daily confidence interval e-graphs. Unfortunately, this would result in doomed nodes receiving invitation letters, but it was for the efficiency of the utopian state. The good of the whole, I concluded. Half awake, as the data slid past my eyes, effortlessly, seamlessly, continually. My mind started to switch off. I started to regress back, to officially, the most important moment of my life. I began to think about the Alpha I just met. They seemed distant, subtle, supremacist, detached. Yet when they made eye contact, I perceived there was a small glimmer of normality. Perhaps they too had been young, unbiased once. Perhaps they too had seen the world through innocent, normal eyes. Perhaps there was still a small glimmer of that in them. A tiny spark, a tiny connection between me and them. But then there was nothing. They were more incarnate of the system than of the nodes. Just more subtle, more intelligent, more game theory aware nodes, always taking the most politically shrewd option to ensure their perpetual elite existence for them and their progeny, I reflected. Even though they were arrogant, supremacist, at heart, they seemed to be just simple nodes. Perhaps I could not judge them. Most nodes would evolve into their mindset or worse when given the option to inherit their power or nurtured into deluded perceptions of an equitable society, such as entitlement and superiority. I considered this whilst trying to keep a happy emotional disposition and attentive work posture to placate the scanners and Ministry Beta Sigma. As the data continued to stream past my partial, dreaming eyes, my consciousness could not fully determine what world I was inhabiting. The office world or the world of the two-dimensional screen. The screen, enticing me in, further and further, with each new bit of data and the anticipation of the next bit of unrealized future data. Or was I in my own private world of thinking to myself? Or was I in the world of the near past, reliving the Alpha meeting, whilst still in my own current private thought-filled mind? Maybe I was in all of them, but not completely in any one world either. A partial relative consciousness. Suddenly, an epiphany struck with a subtle, undetectable violence that simultaneously sent a sudden shudder that reverberated down my spine. Momentarily, my stomach clamped up. Soon I would be in their world, permanently, in the world of the soulless, the unreal, the false. I would be inheriting their power, but what would become of me? How would I act after even a few years of living that life? What would my soul be alike if it was not tainted already with the countless confidence intervals, quotas, inferences, and amendments? Now, I realized that maybe the Alpha were not joking when they asked if I had any objections to being promoted. Maybe an Alpha ship was not the golden ticket to happiness and contentment, far from it. Perhaps it was a burden. Becoming an Alpha, I concluded whilst coming out of my partial dream state. I considered, continuous change affects even contented nodes and situations. Inevitably change brings a less contentedness, a new existence for the current contentedness. Maybe the state tried to protect against sudden, dramatic change and standard deviations, to protect against future discontent, future inefficiencies. Sitting back in my chair, I stared up to the blank ceiling. Soon, I will be an Alpha, unless Blue can interfere. But it was too late for even him to corrupt my expected promotion. No ministry, civil service, beta node had ever failed the 3-month promotion probation period, I reflected. It was strange that there was always some node or creature trying to undermine some similar creature. It seemed to be one of the great laws of the universes. I am a hero amongst the endogenous beta sigma nodes of the Ministry of Inferences, currently. I am held in such a high regard that even the Alpha stoop down from their lofty perches to make eye contact momentarily with me. I concluded that catching pareidolia was my inheritance of the elite world. Damning another node's life was profitable. Was that not what I do every working day when amending the confidence interval quotas? I caught an ecobus from Mallet Street while sitting looking out of the window. I became aware of a group of unbiased binaries traveling from school, sitting behind me. One unbiased binary asked the others about their e-graphs. You should make sure your e-graphs are always a healthy, a rich bright shade of color and not an insipid, shadeless, opaque color. Like the shadeless. She smiled as the others giggled. Not like the shadeless, said another unbiased binary. No, they replied, shouted hysterically. They all agreed that being shadeless, deviating from the official quota mean, was the ultimate social embarrassment for any prepubescent school unbiased. They were conditioned to find it embarrassing and amusing at the thought of deviating from the social mean that the great utopian state had set as the benchmark. They all strive to be part of the in crowd, as all unbiased have since the beginning of time. But state utopia had cleverly took advantage of the fiery, dogmatic loyalty of the immature, ignorant, newly self-conscious teenagers by molding their thoughts and identities with trendy, celebrity-ridden propaganda of how to dress, of what to drink, of what to eat, of how to act. The E-graph was the physical emanation of that peer pressure to be seen conforming, fitting in with the in-crowd, not sticking out like the shadeless losers. The embarrassed, unbiased transgressors of the E-graph would run home after school, not sticking around to share their daily E-graph diagrams with the other unbiased. The unbiased starving themselves, going to extreme self-routine modifications, sleeping early, eating only the expected food ingredients, overly dressing, all desperately trying to increase their E-graph colors, so that next week they would have a glowing, resplendent, rich, colorful E-graph that would make a cathedral proud to use their E-graph as a stained glass window. Sometimes the state would modify the unbiased's E-graph, knowing how susceptible and malleable they were to peer pressure. The Ministry of Inferences noted the unbiased's fasting and acceptance of extreme routines as they desperately tried to increase their E-graph's colors. The utopian state wanted malleable, superficial, dumbed-down, caste-specific endogenous sigma nodes who would suffer, going to great extremes to conform to the utopian state's norm. These unbiased were favored within the ministry roles that state utopia advertised. The unbiased were conditioned to think it was shameful and amusing when other unbiased fell outside the boundaries of their E-graph, which they were encouraged to openly accept. If an unbiased's little surreal shaded graph mascot became shadeless, it only meant they would have more tax to pay or have less credits to spend. Not like the hidden confidence interval where each node was bound to adhere to without even being aware of it. The hidden confidence interval was deadly serious, where outliers would be subtly terminated. In both cases, even if the nodes all tried hard to maintain an obedient, compliant lifestyle, statistically some would fall outside of the acceptable region and would be publicly shamed or subtly terminated. I turned back around and stared out of the window again, whilst remembering Blue's lecture to the recruit yesterday. It's all about the Blue, the best linear, unbiased estimator of the population regression function. All castes, sectors, and industries sample regression functions should try to replicate the great population regression function. For the harmony of the Economic Efficiency Act, the great regulatory financial ether, the invisible hand that guides the covariance of different sectors. To cohabit, cointegrate, amended, and interconnection between the dynamic factors and variables in harmony, augmented by the augmenter, to keep the regulation and quotas intact, to keep the efficiency of the sectors running smoothly with no significant auto-correlated white noise from the residual terms. All variables lagged, to remove trends. Autocorrelations removed with lags to achieve the great Durbin-Watts value of 2. An artificially contrived harmony existing by constantly trimming the outliers of the inefficient, uncorrelated, non-cointegrated. The endogenous nodes approved, the exogenous and outlier removed continually, until there is no unpredictably in the economy, the net present value of everything is 0. No nasty turbulences, just seamless, continuous, predictable profits for the state to feed off. Workers even get in trouble for achieving too good a positive result. It breaks out of their expected mean result and interferes with the NPV and IRR of the Economic Efficiency Act's aggregate demand and the general cash flow of the state. The bus passed into the economic efficiency ambit of the delta-epsilon sample space, inhabited predominantly by delta and epsilon endogenous sigma nodes, the working class. They had all been systematically molded into continual financial vulnerability, by the socio-econometric engineering of the relentless statistical quotas, conditional social associations, and its subtle correlations. It created the illusion that their community was the result of an organic, biological self-selection. Yet, their genetic and social destiny was the direct result of strict econometric models which presented to them a constrained maze of restrictive financial and social options to exist and breed within. The socio-econometric engineering, a contrived invisible hand developed to augment and guide the different sigma castes into genetic and social stagnation, segmented and dived, complacent, accepting sigma. Evolving towards an ergodic trend, it's a mean, a perpetual state of mediocrity. They were relegated to a permanent position of underachievement, destined to a life minimum wage, menial employment on temporary contracts with limited hours per week in order to merely service their continual liability streams of endless bills and the expenses of life. Also, they may carry out their noble, hardwired, natural core process, that of raising a family. These heroes to their families, underappreciated by their neighborhood and mere serfs, to the great cash flow river that cyclically, benevolently, floods the riverbanks of the consumer sigma homes, its metaphorical alluvial soil, the goods and services of sophisticated state utopia. Yet the state demanded the continual sweat of the endogenous sigma who were virtual serfs of the state, who obediently toiled in the proverbial fields of expected statistical routines and work output. So they may service their families' liability streams, which systematically drained back into the great cash flow river. The river's binary liquids, state utopia's economic output, GDP, and its correlated beta market price composites, which perpetually intermingled together like the hot and cold currents of a great ocean. The delta and epsilon nodes reside near the border of the minus A2 lower tail confidence interval of minus 1.96 standard deviation was the neighborhood at the lowest level of normalized utility. They subsisted within the most polluted neighborhoods where they perpetually toil with their mundane tasks relative to the higher-ranked sigma nodes who reside past the fixed mean, nearer the plus A2 confidence interval boundary upper tail. Their concentrated neighborhoods contain significantly higher than average air pollution, containing countless heavy metals which pervades their neighborhoods and lungs, pollutants working its way deep into their vital tissues, passing on their accrued toxins into their unbiased bodies. Engineered prior locations were the lagged, distributed variables that auto-regressed a current node towards a mediocre biological mean. Every aspect of society was geared towards complete economic efficiency and sigma caste categorization, irrespective of societal costs or negative externalities. I considered this as my momentary partial reflection appearing intermittently like an apparition on the wet, drizzly window, while the partially obscured, shifting, insipid sunlight appeared momentary, whilst the bus moved onwards.